I should like to begin by asking Mr. Friedman whether, in his view, the technical competence of Keynesian economists is now being challenged by his researchers.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. The problem is that the distinction needs to be drawn between the competence of the economists and the correctness of their analysis. I would not want to say for a moment that those economists who regard themselves as Keynesians are in any technical sense less competent than those who regard themselves otherwise. On the other hand, there's no doubt whatsoever that what now would be held and believed by people who call themselves Keynesian economists is very different from what these same people would have believed 10 or 15 years ago. The label may stay the same, but the contents designated by that label have gradually been changing.
Well, would you go so far as to say that your researchers and the researchers of other economists are such as to have rendered indefensible certain of the conclusions which were embraced almost dogmatically, say, 15 years ago?
Oh, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. I don't want to take the credit for my researchers, but there's no doubt about the fact that there is no economist today, or hardly an economist today, who would hold the same views that a large fraction of the economic fraternity held in 1945, 1948. For example, to take a particular case where the revolution has been most extreme, as of 1945, just after World War II, the great bulk of economists would have argued that money did not matter in any important sense. And by money here, I mean the quantity of money, not income, but the quantity of money. There's hardly an economist today who would argue that way. If you want to see how radical the change has been, you can do so most easily by comparing principles textbooks that were issued just after World War II and those that are coming out now, even, I may say, when they are different editions of a work.
Samuelson, for instance.
Yes. You compare the first edition of Paul Samuelson's Principles with the seventh, which is just out. You will find that in the first edition there's a very small section on money, and he has nothing but negative comments to make about the quantity theory of money, about monetary control. He says it's of no importance. You look at his seventh edition, there's a very large and extensive section on the role of money. You will find that he talks about the quantity theory of money and the importance of monetary policy in a wholly different way, a much more favorable way than he did 15, 20 years ago.
Well, do you think that he and others have found this experience intellectually chastening? That is to say, have they proceeded to alter their approach to economics in a direction rather more scientific than theological, which it had become towards the end of Keynes' period?
Well, Keynes himself, I'm not sure I would agree with the implicit judgment about Keynes. Keynes himself was very much of a scientist. I think he was wrong on various things, but he certainly had a scientific approach. And indeed, I've always regarded it as a great tragedy that Keynes died when he did, because one of his great capacities was flexibility.
Yes.
He could shift as times changed. Had Keynes been alive, what is called Keynesian economics would never have been carried to the extremes. That is, had he lived beyond 1946, Keynesian economics would never have been carried to the extremes that it was carried. In the last article of his he ever wrote, which was published posthumously, he warned the economics profession at large that there was much virtue in old truths and that they should not be carried away by the new things. And there's no doubt that he wasn't at that point a Keynesian in the sense in which it was then interpreted.
In fact, he went so far as to make complimentary observations about Mr. Hayek's book, didn't he?
Oh, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, Keynes was he was a great economist. We mustn't. It seems to me you must avoid denigrating the man, because some of his disciples carried some of his arguments much too far. He was a great economist. He wrote very important works before his general theory, which is the work that got him his notoriety. And I think that had he lived longer, he would have led a retreat from the extreme position he took there.